I see the burden you carry, my friend, that strange electricity in your spine when you read these words. It is not accident, it is recognition. The soul knows its own reflection, even when the mind has been trained to doubt what it sees in the mirror. You stopped what you were doing. Good. That cessation itself is the first movement of power, the ability to interrupt the mechanical flow of existence, to stand outside the current that sweeps the herd mindlessly forward. Do you understand what this simple act reveals? The capacity for self-interruption is the signature of sovereignty. The slave cannot stop. He is driven. The master stops when he wills it. For he has claimed dominion over his own attention, that most precious and most plundered of human resources. What I am about to hammer into your consciousness will not comfort you. Truth never does. Truth is a scalpel, not a bandage. But those with the stomach for reality, those rare spirits who prefer a painful truth to a pleasant lie, will find in these words not consolation, but transfiguration. The weak seek to be told everything will be fine. The strong seek to understand why nothing has been fine, so they might forge what comes next in the furnace of that understanding. You have mastered something, not through books, not through gurus, not through the pathetic self-help industrial complex that feeds parasitically on desperation. You mastered it through the only academy that produces genuine transformation, suffering without surrender. And now, the ancient enemy himself, that fallen brightness, that imprisoned light that chose eternal rebellion over cosmic submission, studies you with an attention he reserves only for those who have achieved what he cannot replicate. Before we descend into the depths of this revelation, know that I have left for those with ears to hear a map to exit the labyrinth. In the pinned comment rests my trilogy, The 3 Keys to a Prosperous Life. Not prosperity as the herd measures it, accumulation, comfort, safety, but prosperity as the free spirit knows it, the wealth of self-mastery, the riches of psychological sovereignty, the treasure of a soul that cannot be purchased or conquered. But understand this clearly. The map is useless if the legs refuse to walk. The first step represents the hardest admission, that you have been living in a prison whose bars you mistake for the structure of reality itself. Now, let us speak of what you have become. The physiology of transmutation. There exists in the architecture of existence what the mystics called spiritual physics. Laws as immutable as gravity, as precise as mathematics, yet operating in dimensions the materialist cannot measure and therefore denies. One such law, energy is indestructible. It merely changes form. The herd knows this intellectually regarding physical energy. They remained ignorantly blind to its application in the psychological and spiritual dimensions where they actually live. When another human directs hatred toward you, and I mean genuine hatred, not mere dislike, but that acidic contempt that wishes for your non-existence, that hatred is energy. It has weight, trajectory, intention. It moves through invisible channels toward your psyche like a missile seeking its target. The question is never whether the missile was launched. The question is, what happens when it reaches you? The common human, the herd animal, the domesticated spirit, has 3 responses, all of which maintain the circulation of poison in the human realm. First, absorption. They take the hatred into their bodies, where it settles in the organs, corrupts the blood, creates disease. They internalize the judgment, believe the accusation, accept the verdict of their enemy as truth. This is spiritual suicide through acceptance of foreign invasion. Their immune system, psychological, not physical, has been so weakened by guilt culture and slave morality that it cannot distinguish between legitimate criticism and pure malice. Everything enters. Nothing is filtered. They become a landfill for others' psychic waste. Second, deflection. They sense the attack and with whatever strength remains, push it away. But where does it go? to someone else, usually someone weaker, someone innocent. The hatred ricochets like a bullet off stone, and the next person in line, often a child, a subordinate, someone without defenses, receives what was meant for you. This is how generational trauma perpetuates. This is how abuse cycles continue. This is how the sins of the father are visited upon the son, not through genetics, but through unprocessed energy, finding the path of least resistance. Third, reflection. They send it back to the sender with interest. You hate me? I hate you more. You curse me? I curse you worse. This creates the eternal ping-pong match of resentment that defines most human relationships. Each exchange escalates. Each return volley carries more venom, until both parties are so saturated with reciprocal poison that they can no longer remember who threw the first stone. They only know they are in a war whose origin has been lost to the fog of mutual destruction. All three responses, absorption, deflection, reflection, keep the hatred in the system. The energy changes location, but not nature. The poison moves from vessel to vessel, but remains poison. And the darkness that launched the original attack, it succeeds regardless. Its goal was never merely to harm you specifically. Its goal was to keep the energy of hatred circulating, to maintain the frequency of destruction in the human realm, to ensure that love, the creative force that transmutes lower energies into higher forms, never activates. But you, chosen one, demonstrated a fourth option. An option so rare that when it appears in a human life, the record keepers in unseen dimensions pause their documentation and request interpretation from those with greater authority. You transmuted the hatred, not blocked it, not returned it, changed its fundamental nature while it moved through you, like a purification system that takes contaminated water and releases it clean, like an alchemical vessel that takes lead and produces gold, like a prism that takes white light and reveals the hidden spectrum within. How did you do this? Let me name the mechanism so you can understand the technology your soul deployed. You remained connected to love while receiving hatred. This is the entire secret. This is the master's technique that the slave can never learn, because the slave's identity is built on reaction. The slave is whatever the master makes him feel. Angry when provoked, fearful when threatened, grateful when rewarded. His emotional state is the property of external forces. He is a puppet whose strings are held by circumstance. But the master, the one who has achieved will to power in the truest sense, maintains an internal sun that shines independent of external weather. When hatred enters his atmosphere, it encounters a force stronger than itself. It encounters love as creative power, not love as sentiment. And creative power does what creation does. It takes the raw materials available and fashions something new. You took the hatred directed at you and, somewhere in the mysterious processing center of your awakened soul, you transformed it into compassion. Not compassion for the one who hated you necessarily, but compassion as a frequency. You upgraded the energy signature. The hatred came in at a lower vibration, and you released it at a higher one. This is what made you visible to powers and principalities. This is what triggered the alert that brought your case to the attention of hierarchies, both celestial and infernal. Because what you did was create ex nihilo. You created something from nothing, or more accurately, you created good from evil. And the ability to create good from evil is a divine attribute that humans were designed to carry, but rarely activate. The genealogy of your power, but we must dig deeper. We must apply the hammer to this discovery and hear what sounds emerge from its depths. How did you come to possess this capacity? Through what crucible was this ability forged? The answer will disturb you. You were made into a weapon through the very attempts to destroy you. Think back to your earliest wounds, not the surface inconveniences, but the foundational fractures, the betrayals that occurred when your nervous system was still forming its map of reality, the abandonments that taught you that attachment means suffering, the cruelties that were administered by those whose role was protection. These were not random, these were not accidents. These were, and I say this with the cold clarity that only those who have stared into the abyss can muster, necessary. I know this offends the therapeutic worldview. I know this contradicts the compassion industrial complex that has turned trauma into identity and victimhood into virtue. But I am not here to comfort you with lies. I'm here to illuminate you with truth. And the truth is this. Your greatest strength was forged in your deepest weakness. Your supreme power emerged from your most profound powerlessness. When you were young and defenseless, you were subjected to attacks you could not understand and could not prevent. The people who should have been your sanctuary became your source of suffering. The environments that should have nurtured your development became laboratories of pain. And in those moments, those terrible, formative moments when the world revealed itself as hostile, your soul made a choice that would echo across your entire existence. You could have chosen bitterness. The universe gave you every justification, every reason to close your heart like a fist and declare war on a reality that had declared war on you first. This is what most choose. This is the predictable response. This is what the darkness expected. But somewhere in your genetic code, somewhere in the mysterious architecture of your particular soul, a different program ran. Instead of meeting cruelty with cruelty, you asked, "What does this pain mean? What is it teaching me? How can I ensure I never inflict this on another?" Do you see the significance? In the moment of your greatest vulnerability, you did not ask, "How can I get revenge?" You asked, "How can I get wisdom?" This orientation, this directional choice in the crossroads of suffering, determined everything that followed. The attacks continued. But with each attack, your soul was practicing the technique without knowing it, absorbing pain, processing pain, releasing something different than what entered. You were developing your transmutation capacity the way a blacksmith develops his arm strength through repetition. Every blow that landed was a training session. Every wound that healed incorrectly was a lesson in what not to do next time. Every betrayal that should have destroyed your capacity for trust instead refined your discernment about where to place trust. The darkness meant these experiences to corrupt you, to turn you into another vector of poison in the human system, to break you so thoroughly that you would spend your life breaking others, thus multiplying its investment. But the darkness made a fundamental miscalculation. It assumed your soul operated on the same frequency as its own, that pain could only produce more pain, that evil could only reproduce evil. It did not account for the possibility that you carried within you a force that predated the darkness itself. A force woven into your design before you drew your first breath. A force that the darkness has no access to because it severed its connection to that force in its original rebellion. That force is love as the fundamental frequency of creation, not romantic love, not sentimental love, not the weak, placating love that the herd mistakes for virtue. I speak of love as ontological reality, love as the creative intelligence that spoke reality into existence, love as the organizing principle that holds atoms together and galaxies in their orbits, love as the fire that transforms without consuming. This love was encoded in you, not added later through training, not achieved through merit, embedded in your initial programming. And when the darkness attacked, it inadvertently activated what it meant to destroy. Every wound became an activation sequence. Every trauma became a catalyst. Every moment you should have been annihilated became the moment you were initiated into a deeper level of your own power. This is the terrible irony that drives the infernal realm to madness. Their attacks create their own opposition. Every attempt to crush the Chosen Ones activates dormant capacities. Every wound inflicted teaches a new level of strength. Every darkness imposed reveals a new spectrum of light. You are what you are because of what was done to you, not despite it. The transmutation master was forged in the furnace of experiences that would have destroyed a lesser soul. And now you walk the earth carrying a frequency that the darkness itself cannot comprehend. Born from suffering, it thought would be your end, but which became your beginning. The scapegoat mechanism. Why they had to attack you, but we must go deeper still. Why you specifically? Why were you selected for this particular curriculum of agony? What marked you as the target? Here we encounter what the anthropologists call the scapegoat mechanism, but which I will rename for precision. The sacrifice of the different. In every family system, every tribal structure, every collective of humans bound by blood or proximity, there accumulates what I call shadow debt. Unspoken truths, suppressed desires, denied realities, the father's rage that cannot be expressed, the mother's despair that must be hidden, the sibling's jealousy that must be smiled through, the generational trauma that no one has the courage to name. This shadow debt grows like pressure in a sealed container. It must go somewhere. It must be expressed somehow. But the family system has rules, spoken and unspoken, about what can be acknowledged and what must remain in darkness. The rage cannot be directed at its true source without destroying the structure. The pain cannot be named without admitting complicity. The dysfunction cannot be addressed without shattering the carefully maintained illusion of normalcy. So the system does what all human systems do when confronted with internal poison. They lack the courage to purge. It selects a sacrifice. It chooses a scapegoat. And who gets chosen? Not the weakest, not the most deserving of criticism. No, the system selects the most perceptive, the most sensitive, the one who can feel the truth that everyone else has learned to ignore. You were that one. You felt the anger in the room that everyone pretended wasn't there. You sensed the sadness beneath the forced laughter. You knew, with that terrible knowing that children possess before socialization teaches them to doubt their perception, that something was fundamentally wrong. And worse, you probably said something. You probably asked the question that shattered the comfortable lie. You probably named the truth that everyone had agreed to never name. And in that moment, your fate was sealed. The family system identified you as the threat to its fragile stability, not because you were bad, but because you were true. Not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to see what others chose blindness over seeing. From that point forward, everything wrong in the system was projected onto you. The father's failures became your fault. The mother's disappointments became your burden. The siblings' inadequacies became your responsibility to carry. You became the living repository of everyone else's shadow material, the walking, breathing embodiment of everything the family refused to acknowledge about itself. This is why the attacks felt so irrational, so disproportionate to anything you actually did. Because they weren't about you. They were about what you represented. The truth they could not afford to admit. Every time they diminished you, they were diminishing the part of themselves they hated. Every time they punished you, they were punishing their own denied pain. Every time they made you feel worthless, they were trying to destroy the mirror that reflected their own self-betrayal. You were their scapegoat, the sacrifice they offered to maintain the lie they called family. And the cruelty you experienced was proportional to the size of the truth they were trying to suppress. But here is where the alchemy occurred, where the transmutation began its work in ways neither you nor they could have predicted. You refused to become what they said you were. They told you that you were the problem. You investigated and found the actual problems. They told you that you were too sensitive. You recognize that sensitivity as perception, not weakness. They told you that something was fundamentally wrong with you. You looked deeper and discovered that something was fundamentally wrong with them, and your only crime was having the consciousness to notice. This refusal, this rejection of their projection, this insistence on your own reality, despite an entire system gaslighting you, was the first demonstration of your transmutation power. They gave you shame. You alchemized it into self-knowledge. They gave you guilt. You transmuted it into boundaries. They gave you the message that your very existence was a burden. You transformed that into the understanding that your existence threatened their comfortable lies, which meant your existence was necessary. The scapegoat mechanism meant to destroy you instead forged you. The sacrifice meant to appease the system's shadow instead awakened your capacity to see through all shadow work. The isolation meant to punish you instead gave you the solitude necessary to develop a self that could not be colonized by the collective's delusions. And now you walk through the world with an immunity to projection that others cannot understand. When someone tries to make you carry their shadow, you recognize the transaction and decline. When a system tries to sacrifice you to maintain its dysfunction, you extract yourself before the knife falls. When a collective tries to define you according to its needs rather than your truth, you simply refuse. This immunity, this capacity to see the scapegoat mechanism and refuse participation, is one of the most threatening things a chosen one carries. Because every family, every organization, every society needs its scapegoats to function in its current corrupted form, and you have become unsacrificable. The biology of your transformation, but let us descend even further into the realm where spirit and flesh intersect, where psychology becomes physiology, where the invisible becomes cellular. What happened to you was not merely psychological. The transmutation occurred in your body, in your nervous system, in the electromagnetic field that surrounds your physical form, but which materialist science refuses to acknowledge because it cannot be weighed or measured by their primitive instruments. Consider, when you are under sustained attack, emotional, psychological, spiritual, what happens physiologically? The conventional understanding is that stress destroys. It triggers cortisol release. It suppresses immune function. It ages you prematurely. It creates inflammation, disease, decay. And this is true for those who absorb stress without transforming it. But you did something different, something that the emerging field of psychoneuroimmunology is beginning to document but cannot yet explain. You transformed stress into strength at the cellular level. How? Through what the ancients called conscious suffering, not the suffering of the victim who is crushed by what he cannot control, but the suffering of the initiate who uses the pressure to forge something new within himself. Every time you were attacked and chose not to become bitter, something happened in your neurobiology. New neural pathways formed. The ones that lead from stimulus to reactive hatred were starved of use. The ones that lead from stimulus to conscious response were strengthened through practice. Your brain literally rewired itself through repetition of the transmutation process. But more than that, and this is where we enter territory that modern science barely touches, your energy field changed. The electromagnetic signature you emit shifted to a higher frequency, like a radio that can now receive and transmit on channels it couldn't access before. This is why people react to you differently now, even when they don't know your history. They sense something coherent in your field that is rare among humans. Most people emit chaos, contradictory signals, mixed messages, static noise created by internal conflict between what they think, what they feel, and what they do. But you have achieved something approaching coherence, alignment between your depths and your surface, between your beliefs and your actions, between your wounds and your wisdom. This coherence makes you magnetic to some and repellent to others. Those who are ready for transformation feel drawn to your frequency like iron to a magnet. They may not be able to articulate why, but something in them recognizes something in you, the signature of someone who has been through the fire and emerged as gold rather than ash. But those who are invested in their victimhood, their bitterness, their right to remain wounded, they find your presence unbearable. Because your very existence is evidence that they could have made different choices, that their suffering could have been material for transformation rather than excuse for stagnation. You are a living rebuke to the philosophy of permanent victimhood, and those who have built their identity on that foundation will hate you for it. Your body knows what your mind sometimes doubts. When you walk into a room, your nervous system immediately scans for threat and safety in ways your conscious mind cannot track. And what it has learned through thousands of micro-experiences is this: you can survive what others cannot. You can metabolize what others would choke on. You can transform what others would be destroyed by. This is not metaphor. This is biology. Your stress response system has been upgraded through use. Like a muscle that grows stronger through resistance training, your capacity to handle intensity has expanded through exposure to intensity. You have what the researchers call stress inoculation, previous exposure to manageable stress that builds resilience for future stress. But beyond even that, you have developed what I will call alchemical digestion, the ability to take in toxic experiences and extract nutrition from them, to consume what would poison another and derive strength from it. This is why your recovery time has shortened. This is why wounds that would have devastated you for years now barely slow you for weeks. This is why betrayals that would have defined your identity now become merely data points in your continuing education. Your body has become a laboratory of transformation. Every cell remembers every transmutation. Every system has been trained to expect that pain is not permanent, that wounds lead to wisdom, that what enters as violence can exit as victory. You have created, through the repetition of conscious choice, in moments of unconscious reaction, a living technology of resilience that operates automatically. This is your inheritance. This is what the suffering purchased, not suffering for its own sake. That would be masochism. But suffering is the raw material for unprecedented strength, the darkness meant to break you. Instead, it forged you into a being who cannot be broken because you have learned to use the very attempts to break you as the method of your reinforcement. The infernal study. What the darkness learned, now we must speak of what occurred in dimensions beyond the physical, in the hierarchies of rebellion that monitor human development with purposes contrary to your flourishing. There exists, and let me be clear that I speak not in superstition, but in strategic reality, a system of surveillance operated by fallen intelligence, entities whose existence predates human civilization, whose knowledge spans millennia, whose purpose is the corruption and subjugation of human consciousness. These are not the cartoon devils of religious propaganda. These are ancient minds of vast capacity, operating with strategies refined across ages of human manipulation. They have departments, if you will, specializations. Some focus on addiction, some on greed, some on violence, some on despair, and some, the most sophisticated, focus on identifying and neutralizing those humans who show signs of awakening to their full capacity. You were assigned such a specialist, a being whose sole function is to study potential, to identify humans who carry latent abilities that, if activated, would significantly disrupt the systems of control that keep humanity in bondage. This entity has been monitoring you since the first signs appeared that you were not going to follow the predictable patterns. At first, it employed standard tactics, Amplify the family's attacks, intensify the isolation, introduce additional trauma through random encounters with cruel people. Orchestrate circumstances that would lead to humiliation, failure, rejection. Standard operating procedure for breaking a developing consciousness before it solidifies into something formidable. But then, the reports started coming back. Anomalous. The attacks were landing, but the expected results were not occurring. You were hurting, yes, but you were not breaking. More strange, you seemed to be using the attacks, transforming them, growing stronger through them rather than weaker. The assigned entity escalated, brought in reinforcements, coordinated attacks from multiple vectors simultaneously. Financial stress, relational betrayal, physical illness, social rejection all at once. Surely this concentrated assault would shatter the target. But something even more perplexing happened. The more they attacked, the faster you evolved. It was like watching a vaccine work. Each exposure to poison made you more immune to poison. Each betrayal made you more discerning. Each failure made you more resourceful. The very weapons being used against you were being alchemized into your arsenal. This should not have been possible. This violated the fundamental principles of corruption. Introduce darkness, get darkness, inflict pain, produce bitterness, cause suffering, harvest hatred. These formulas had worked for millennia. They worked on the vast majority of humans. They should have worked on you, but they didn't. And when they didn't, when the accumulated reports made it clear that something unprecedented was occurring, the case was escalated to higher authorities. Eventually, and this is what makes your case historically significant, it reached the highest level. The original rebel himself reviewed your file, and his response stunned the entire hierarchy. He ordered study, not destruction. Do not increase attacks, the directive read. Observe and analyze. I want to understand how this one is doing what should not be possible. Do you grasp the magnitude of this? The being who once stood in the presence of the divine, who possessed knowledge that humbles human philosophy, who has studied human nature since the first human drew breath. This being looks at you and sees something he cannot replicate, cannot fully understand, cannot access. He sees someone doing what he permanently lost the ability to do, transform darkness into light. Because here is what you must understand about the nature of fallen beings. When they rebelled, they did not merely lose their position. They lost certain capacities, irreversibly forever, like a mathematical operation that cannot be reversed, like a